I suppose a lot of you have heard by now that George Zimmerman was found not guilty. Here we have someone who was a neighborhood watch captain in Sanford, Florida, apparently cleared of all charges in the shooting of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed African-American teenager that basically unleashed a furious debate across the country over racial profiling, self-defense, and equal justice. Zimmerman barely blinked, even when the verdict was announced. He could have been easily convicted of second-degree murder or manslaughter, but the jurors that consisted of 6 women, all but one of them were white, reached a verdict of not guilty after deliberating well into the night Saturday. The jurors considered nearly 3 weeks of often widely conflicting testimony over who was the aggressor on the rainy night of the 17-year-old was shot while walking through a gated townhouse community where he was staying. You know, the defense has said that it was a case of self-defense, claiming Trayvon Martin had knocked down Zimmerman and was slamming him into the concrete sidewalk. But Zimmerman had fired his gun. Prosecutors called Zimmerman a liar. Basically portrayed him as a wannabe cop, a vigilante who had grown frustrated by break-ins in his neighborhood committed primarily by young African-American men. Zimmerman assumed Martin was up to no good and took the law into his own hands. The state attorney, Angela Corey, said after the verdict that she believed second-degree murder was the appropriate charge because Zimmerman's mindset fit the bill of second-degree murder. And she basically said, we charged what we believed we could prove. The verdict drew near. Police and city leaders in the Orlando suburb of Sanford and other parts of Florida said that they were taking precautions against the possibility of mass protest or unrest in the event of an acquittal. To be honest with you, we probably could have been looking at a repeat of the Los Angeles riots of 1992 after the Rodney King verdict. But getting back to the Trayvon Martin case, Zimmerman wasn't arrested for 44 days after February 26th. Florida stand your ground law on self-defense prohibited them from bringing the charges. Florida gives people wide latitude to use deadly force if they fear death or bodily harm. But Trayvon Martin's parents, along with civil rights leaders such as Reverend Jesse James and Al Sharpton, argued that Zimmerman, whose father is white and whose mother is Hispanic, had racially profiled their son. And also, they accused the investigators of dragging their feet because Martin was a black teenager. Before a special prosecutor was even assigned to the case, ordered Zimmerman's arrest, thousands of protesters gathered in Sanford, Florida, Miami, New York, and everywhere else. Many of them wearing hoodies like the one Trayvon Martin had on the night he was killed. Also carrying Skittles and a can of iced tea, items Martin had in his pocket. Even the president weighed in, saying that if he had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. Despite the racially charged nature of the case, race was barely mentioned at the trial. Even after the verdict, prosecutors said race was not about race. The case has never been about race or the right to bear arms. They believe that the case all along was about boundaries and the fact that George Zimmerman exceeded those boundaries. Well, even after Jan Tell gave some of the trial's most riveting testimony, she said she overheard Martin demand, "What are you following me for?" And then yelled, "Get off, get off," before his cell phone went dead. The jurors had to sort out clashing testimony from 56 witnesses, including police, neighbors, friends, and family members. For example, witnesses who got fleeting glimpses of the fight in the darkness gave differing accounts of who was on top. And Martin's parents and Zimmerman's parents both claimed that the person heard screaming for help in the background of a neighbor's 911 call was their son. Numerous other relatives and friends weighed in. The record was played over and over in court. Zimmerman had cuts and scrapes on his face and the back of his head, but prosecutors suggested the injuries were not serious. To secure a second-degree murder conviction, prosecutors had to convince the jury that Zimmerman acted with a depraved state of mind, that is, with ill will, hatred, or spite. Prosecutors said that he demonstrated that when he muttered, "Blank punks, these blank, they always get away," during a call to police as he watched Martin walk through his neighborhood. To win a manslaughter conviction, prosecutors had to convince the jury that only Zimmerman killed without lawful justification. I went to my local affiliate, WFAA, to read about this story. I went to their Facebook page. An overwhelming amount of comments. But I managed to comment at the time that I was outraged at the outcome. But then again, you have to realize that the state failed to meet their burden of proof needed for a possible conviction. Now, the defense did prove its case and got an acquittal. At the same time, we don't want to speculate. We can only accept the facts that are available to us and take it from there. We may not agree with the decision, but that's the way the law works. If the prosecution fails to meet the burden of proof in any case where there is insufficient evidence, then there is no choice but to either declare a mistrial and go through the process all over again, or return with a not guilty verdict. Now, unless any of us were even in the court, none of us can say whether or not he's innocent or guilty. Some of us may have a hunch or suspicion, but unless you watched it, all we were doing was guessing. Now, all of us may remember the Los Angeles riots of 1992, where Rodney King was brutally beaten by police officers, 4 of them. But then on April 29th, 1992, we managed to get a close look at what happened afterwards. A lot of it was either racial profiling or this and that. But the fact remained that 4 officers were acquitted of the crime, and there was a lot of civil unrest that occurred afterwards. Now, whether any of us agree with the decision of the jury or not, whether any of us agree with it, I ask you, please don't take out your frustrations on those around you, your city, your state, or even the entire country. If you want to voice your outrage, voice it to the prosecutors, voice it to the jurors. But please, don't let this be a repeat of the Los Angeles riots of 1992. You want to voice your concerns, voice it to the prosecutors who failed to meet their burden of proof in order to get a conviction. Now, I should tell you, I didn't want to have to watch the case unfold, but as a nation, something like this is very, very hard to ignore. But had George Zimmerman not did what he did, had he just stayed on the phone and not even consider, and I do mean not even consider following him, Trayvon Martin would not be where he is today, buried. He'd have been here today, spending time with his family, friends, and doing anything that any teenager would have done. Stand to your ground law in Florida. There's still no excuse in the killing of anybody. But even if the state has not proven their case, I'm afraid to say that this is just one of the cases where everyone thought race was going to be an issue. Everyone thought that profiling was going to be an issue. The right to bear arms. It was just basically someone who was basically out for revenge or something like that. Or maybe he wanted to enforce the law in his own way, but instead took the life of an innocent young man. I'm not trying to say that George Zimmerman may have deserved an acquittal or anything like that. But you got to understand, jurors made the decision. Had the state proved its burden of proof, maybe George Zimmerman would not be walking away from this. Maybe he would be in jail, serving a sentence of murder in the second degree, or more than likely serving a manslaughter conviction. I mean, what are your thoughts? For your thoughts, you can leave a comment if you wish, but I recommend that you send your thoughts and prayers to Trayvon Martin's family, and maybe bring this issue up with the prosecutors or the jurors involved in the case. If it weren't for double jeopardy, more than likely George Zimmerman could have been brought back to trial, and maybe we could go through this whole case all over again. But because of double jeopardy, the state of Florida can't try him again. So basically, the case is closed, but it still doesn't bring any closure to Trayvon Martin's family.